Could you give some highlights, if we're getting into this now, the principles and building blocks that make the new project management within SKF so powerful? You said earlier, for example, the sizing scorecard.
Yeah, but maybe before we get to the sizing scorecard,
Yes.
most probably it's good to mention is that this new method and way of working is based on best practice. And because it's based on best practice, you have something that's principle-based, not something that is based on people's own initiatives. That makes it very powerful, because in most instances you find people trying to come up with own initiatives and own interpretations, whereas this is based on best practice and a bigger community and a broader community. So therefore you gain that experience for a very little cost in your organization by using a best practice approach. Using best practice approach is then containing principles and control themes and management products for your project management area. And within that, then you can then start saying is, how should your projects look like? So defining it. What kind of size of project should you have? And we came up with a very simple way of working, because that's always the interesting part is, do you have a project, yes or no? Is it defined according to our definition? And then when you've defined it, how do you start? How do you say, is it a work package, is it a typical, simple, or a complex project, which is the 4 areas that we use for project complexity in SKF. And for us, is the sizing scorecard is the starting point, which kind of directs you with 9-point questionnaire, saying is that, what kind of project are you going to run? So if you're not sure, start with that. It's a very simple exercise. That's the starting point. Then the next step is to go into more detail, and you can read up about that within our area online, and that will show you what you should do.
Why is that so important to grade your project and to label at what level is this project or initiative?
Yeah. It's important to classify your projects, because that will eliminate a lot of waste from a cost and time perspective. But also, we spoke about earlier, is the load. So you also know what kind of activities has to be performed by an individual or by a team. So you can actually, forecast and be better at predictability. So from that perspective is, if you know you're going to do a certain type of project or a certain work package, you know what kind of resources, you know what kind of people needs to be added to make it successful.
Interesting. You also mentioned earlier that you have to be very specific when separating business processes and project processes. Could you elaborate a bit on that?
Yes, that is an interesting point, because what we tend to do, and we've seen that in the past, not only in our organization, but we've seen that from companies that we benchmarked, is that a lot of people have done that in early on stages, is to take project management and embed them or integrate them into their business process. It can be done, but then it has to be very experienced people working in that area to understand what is the project process or the project life cycle, and what is the business process. Otherwise it becomes very cumbersome, very complex, and it can take a very long time to get anything done in that kind of process.
Interesting. You also said that you have to be less prescriptive, and by being less prescriptive you will get more output.
Yes, because if you think about it logically, if I'm going to give you a list and say, please take this list, tick the boxes, and then you've done that, but you feel like, why should I do it? Because you don't really know what is the reason for filling in this template. But if you get taught in a fashion to say, okay, fine, if I require all these templates, or do I require any of these documents at a certain point for doing a certain function, then I know, this is the reason why I'm doing it. There's a benefit for me for doing it, because I can reuse it. But if it's just one long list of stuff that you have to tick and you don't actually apply it or use it, what is the benefit of doing that?
And then motivation goes down.
And motivation goes down. So from that perspective, I think you shouldn't be too prescriptive, and get people to think, because then you interact with your activities and your task you have to do.
And on that theme, you said, don't make it complicated. Before, I heard you say it several times, don't make it complicated.
Yep. You want to keep it as simple as possible. And we always say in our world within SKF for project management is, don't assume that you have a complex project if you don't gone through the right classification. Rather start at the lower end and say, I have a simple project, and you can scale it up. But don't always start on the other side. And we see that people have a general tendency to always complicate things, make it more difficult. And why? Why do you have to do that? At the end of the day, is you have to focus on what you need to deliver. And if you can do it in a few simple steps, then why not do it in a few simple steps?
Right. So another interesting thing from the discussion beforehand was you have often an allocation of resources towards the individual, allocation of resources towards the project, but not so much towards the organization that should actually support the project or be aware of what the project is doing at the moment. And you have done that a bit differently.
Yeah, because once again, we're focusing on the deliverable. What is it that you're trying to deliver? We're not focusing on how loaded is the people, because load can be deceiving sometimes. You can be fully loaded, but you can't deliver anything at the end of the day.
Yes.
So we rather want to say we want product to be delivered, and then we can say that you can have less load. But it's up to you to decide, and hence the reason we want you to understand how do you classify what you're going to do. The classification is important from that perspective.
I want to get back to that that you said earlier, that you're using best practice. Isn't that, if you say best practice, could you really apply a best practice from one part of the organization to another? Or is it something you have to think about when applying a best practice?
Well, if you look at, we've had another initiative within SKF recently called Business Excellence, and that's also principle-based, also best practice. So if you have something like that, you have project management is also best practice-based, then it becomes very easy for the individual to think about, how do I apply this when I go back to the organization? And yes, it is done. And it's also a lot more easier for people in faraway places from head office to take on the principles or the best practice approach and then apply to their area than trying to rethink something and start it up on their own.
Okay, so finally a question. How would you advise a company that is starting to work with a training partner? What's the best practice in working with a partner such as Wenell?
Besides choosing Wenell as the first starting point,
yes.
That is the most logical step, I would say. But I think it's also the way that they approach the training, the curriculum that we have in place, is that they've embraced that it's our content and our structure, and that message has been across to our people that's been trained. Hence the reason I must also admit is that the project management training within SKF is one of the most popular trainings that we have in our academy. So if I had to be really non-biased, I think that Wenell has the capability, they have the experience, and they also have the knowledge. And if you combine all of those elements in what you're trying to do within an organization, whether it's trying to embed or trying to implement, you will really get the benefit if you use a company such as Wenell.